अस्सलाम वालेकुम दोस्तों आज हमारे बज़्म कामरान में जो मेहमान हैं इट्स लिटिल बिट अनयूजुअल। मेरे बहुत ही अच्छे दोस्त। यूजली हम जो पॉडकास्ट करते हैं वो ज़्यादातर लेफ्टिस्ट और प्रोग्रेसिव जो लेफ़्ट के पाकिस्तान के लोग होते हैं उनसे करते हैं, मगर ये जाहिद साहब जो जाहिद हुसैन हमारे दोस्त हैं, इनका कोई क्लेम नहीं है कि ये ही इज़ अ कम्युनिस्ट। He termed himself as an anarchist, right? I am right, Zaid?
Libertarian Socialist.
Libertarian Socialist. Okay, I will ask you about the definition of this also.
Yeah.
And so, most probably this, ये उर्दू इंग्लिश दोनों मिला के जो है हम करेंगे इसको, क्योंकि इसको उर्दू बोलने में थोड़ा सा प्रॉब्लम होती है। ये जो वजह हमने ये जो पॉडकास्ट कर रहे हैं जाहिद के साथ, इसके वजह ये है कि बहुत ही अच्छा लगता है कि जो शख्स अपने आप को कम्युनिस्ट नहीं कह रहा वो बाज़ दफ़ा ऐसी बातें कर रहा होता है जो अच्छी लगती हैं दिल को। तो जाहिद, थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर गिविंग अस अ टाइम।
My pleasure.
Okay, first of all, explain what you have termed yourself. What?
Well, I think in essence, socialism is about social justice,
Social justice, right?
addressing inequalities. But I don't think you can divorce social justice and inequality from liberty, individual liberty, the ability to make decisions for yourself without interference from external forces. And I think where Bolshevism went wrong was it really became one tyranny replacing another. So the tyranny of capital, the tyranny of wealth, the tyranny of poverty, if you're impoverished yourself, being replaced by a tyranny of your relationship with the party, with the massive bureaucracy which controls your life. Now, to communists, to people who believe in Bolshevism, they think it's a price worth paying because it addressed inequality. But to me, addressing inequality and individual liberty, those two things go hand in hand. One is not more important than the other. To tell people they're equal, but they can't have freedom of movement or freedom of thought or freedom of communication, that's a heavy price to pay for equality, I think.
And
you can have both.
Zaid, do you think that individual liberty is possible without the freedom of economic freedom?
Without economic, there's two ways of addressing economic equality. You can make everyone poor, or you can try and lift everyone up. So I'm an optimist. I believe in lifting everyone up, and I don't think the two things are necessarily separate from each other. Why? That's an assumption that a lot of communists make, that you have to sacrifice one for the other. I think you can have both. You can have you can have governance, good governance, which addresses factors which create inequality, but at the same time tolerates dissent and tolerates difference of opinion and freedom of movement and freedom of thought.
Okay, one more thing. You just at the start of the interview, you just criticizes the Bolshevik, right? So, is there any credit on their part, do you think, or no?
The Bolsheviks?
Yeah. What they have done, has they done anything good, do you think?
Well, I think they were remarkably well organized, and I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from the Bolshevik Revolution and the Bolshevik coup, I would call it. There's lots of lessons to be learned from there about, propaganda, about campaigning, about good organization. And I'm sure a lot of them had decent intentions in the beginning, but I think the whole plan was a little bit, I think where it ended up maybe wasn't where it had intended to end up, with this huge bureaucracy and state control of thought and movement. But yeah, it wasn't all bad. It's all relative, isn't it? Were they any worse than the Tsar and the 1,000 years of serfdom and the tyranny? No, I don't think they were worse than what went before them. So let's put it in context. Yeah, I'm not saying that they were any worse than what was already there. They were probably better than what was there. If anyone who knows about Russian history and about the relationship between the aristocracy and the poor,
the Tsars and all
and
that,
serfdom, and the relationship to land and how the peasants were treated. Clearly it was in the beginning an improvement.
And one more thing, just make me clear, right? Is it possible that without having a party, without having a strict discipline, right?
Yeah.
Discipline like Bolshevik, right? What they had at that time. So is it possible to change the life or change the society without having such party organization or?
Well, you need some kind of organisation. Obviously, you need people to combine and come together to affect change. But it's a question of how you do that. So I don't disagree with the party structure or with the structure of organisation. I think people need to organise. Otherwise, everyone's doing their own thing, and you have no concerted effort. So if a lot of people come together wanting the same outcome, they can achieve that. But it's a question of what is the outcome they're going for.
But in a recent history, we have seen that movement Occupy Wall Street, right?
Yeah.
What was the outcome of that? Because that movement was without party. Behind that movement, there was nothing, right? I can term that anarchist movement, right?
Yeah.
So what was the outcome of that?
Well, I mean,
That was the huge movement at that time.
it was, yeah. I mean, it petered out a little bit, but they did have effect. I mean, they did make people think. I was in London during the Occupy. We had the same movement in London,
Yeah.
and I think the reason it wasn't as effective as it could have been was because of the media. They didn't get the coverage they deserved. The news didn't cover it. The mass media, which is controlled by very rich people.
But again, the thing is, right? If you are not having the power, if you are not controlling the media houses, this is what happened, right? So
Yeah, no, but the thing is, two wrongs don't make a right. I mean, what you're saying is that because these people are tyrannical and because they use their wealth to control the media, that the proletariat should do the same thing. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that I don't think that just because your tyranny is better than their tyranny because you want the right outcome. I don't. We fundamentally disagree on that.
okay, I don't want to further discuss on that.
Fair
It's
enough.
fine,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay, now let's talk about the Pakistani situation
Yeah.
and international things, right?
Yeah.
So how do you feel here in Pakistan? You are on a short visit here.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I love coming to Pakistan. You know that, yeah. I
yeah,
always look forward to coming here. I think the people are very warm, very generous, and my experience here has always been positive. Maybe because of you, because of the people you introduced me to. But I've never had a bad experience, whether it's in business or whether it's in I've met good people here, and I think Pakistani people are very warm, very generous. They're fundamentally kind. But obviously, this country has serious problems. Yeah, so
so what the solution? Do you have any solution for the people of Pakistan or?
yeah, we do have solution, and the solution lies in good leadership. But unfortunately, there's no good leadership here. It needs good leadership. It needs brave leadership. Pakistan has a very serious problem, right? And the biggest problem Pakistan has is interference in the democratic process. Yeah, as we know, there's a certain organisation which is very powerful here, and which manages always to pervert the course of democracy and what civil institutions and what civil politicians are trying to address. But you see, the civil politicians themselves are not passive in this. Yeah, they are complicit in the whole thing, because I genuinely believe that if you have on one side you have a strong military, and on the other side you have really strong combined democratic forces, irrespective of their position, from the left to the right, from the religious to the secular, if they all stood on one side and said, let us run our affairs, with proper democratic processes. If they did that and they stood together, I think they would win. But the problem is, there's always one sellout, yeah? Whether it's Nawaz Sharif, whether it's Imran Khan, whether it's Nawaz Sharif again, whether it's Zardari, there's always someone in there who's prepared to collaborate with the military establishment to undermine the democratic process. And for as long as that happens, you're going to have this situation where unelected, unaccountable bodies are having disproportionate amount of influence and control. And I think this is why Pakistan can't really progress. Look at Bangladesh, yeah? 1971, it was probably the poorest country in the world, yeah? It's outstripped Pakistan now. Why? Because they haven't had any military coups. They've had civil governance. It hasn't always been great civil governance. It hasn't always been democratic. It's been,
So
authoritarian.
do you think that democratic process have the remedy for all the illness?
All the illness, I mean, look, it may not be the remedy for all the illnesses, right? But at least they're accountable. If you give someone a 4 or 5 year term to do things and they fail, then you can tell them to go away and vote for someone else, yeah? And as long as people are allowed to think clearly and freely and make decisions freely without any interference, then eventually you do get outcomes which are quite good. But, they have to be, it's a historical process. It's a historical achievement. It has to be allowed to evolve to get to where it needs to go to.
But Zaid, as far as Pakistan is concerned, one cannot vote, right? That process is not what you say.
It's not fair and free.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah. Well,
not
this is
fair
a
and
problem,
free,
isn't it?
right?
You know, it's not fair and free because some civilian politicians are complicit
No, but even there are feudals also.
Yeah. There are unique problems in
Yeah,
Pakistan. Yeah, clearly because of feudalism and because of the patronage and nepotism
exactly.
and the corruption that goes on. Yeah, so they have to be addressed, you know, by proper laws and by education. I mean, fundamentally, right? If people are educated and free thinkers, yeah, they can make their own decisions. But you know, while you have massive illiteracy, then you have a situation where feudal landlords can dictate to people what they do with
Exactly.
their vote. So, I mean, those are fundamental problems, aren't they? You know, and this is again, in the short term, you're going to struggle to deal with that, right? But if you have civilian governments which are strong and which are consistent, then over time you can deal with that because maybe they'll use their taxes for education rather than for military. You know, maybe they'll use the taxes for
Yeah, this is what happened in New Delhi, right? They put so much budget on the education,
the
right?
Aam Aadmi Party.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
They've heavily the Indian government period since the independence. They've invested heavily in education. You know, they've and that's why that they have like they have an intelligentsia now. You know, which is around the world. You know, Microsoft programmers and things like that. You know, that they've invested heavily in education and they're reaping the dividends of that. And maybe you know Pakistan could have bought less military hardware and made more scholars over the last 70 years. You know, it might have done them, might have done better for them.
and what do you think about the standard of education in here in Pakistan? And what they are teaching to the students, to the young generation, especially about the history.
Yeah, well, I think you have to be very careful what you say here, right? But I think I've been here many, many times, as you know, right? And you know, thanks to you, I've managed to meet lots of different people, people who are much older than us, people who've you know been around in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, politically engaged people, progressive people, free thinkers. And what I have learned is that, and I've said this to you before, that I think Pakistan underwent a cultural revolution in the late 1970s. From 1977 onwards, I think Pakistan underwent a cultural revolution, which was orchestrated by a military dictator, and where you know he basically outlawed a lot of things. Education system was changed to Islamify it and make it more Arabify it, as I would say. Yeah. The history, I think, was probably rewritten as well. You know more than I do about that, right? But I'm pretty sure the
Yeah,
history was rewritten, and the way history is taught was rewritten. I think in university campuses, men and women weren't allowed to sit together, and tea house culture was basically, you know, disbanded by force. And I think what that did was that created a generation of people who weren't critical thinkers, you know, who basically were like sheep, you know, accepting certain dogma which was dictated to them about, I don't think, like religion. It's good to be religious. It's good to believe in your God and everything, yeah. But surely you should question it first, right? Before you adopt a faith, you know, it shouldn't be because your dad told you to do it that you're going to become a Muslim or a Hindu. You should be able to question these things, yeah, and be a follower for the right reasons, not because you were told to do it. And I think there's an element in Pakistan of a certain type of person who doesn't tolerate any kind of discussion or dissent, you know, who looks down upon critical thinking and sees it as dangerous. And I think it's difficult to progress as a nation when you have this kind of mindset. You know, I think you need to get away from that. You understand? I don't know, but that's my feeling anyway. And I think to answer your original question, I know a lot of people do English syllabus here, and a lot of people, some do American syllabus, etc. But from when I speak to Pakistani people who are educated and who come to Europe, and I speak to them, and they try to speak English, compared to older people who were educated in the 60s and 70s, and they speak English, there's a big difference. You know, for example, I'm just giving you one example, one snapshot, yeah? Older people speak much better English. Older educated people from Pakistan speak much better English than some of the current generation do, you know? So maybe that says something about the standard of education here.
and again, the thing is, the the class system is also do so much in this,
It
right?
does, yeah. When you speak to
Because
people from
yeah,
upper
exactly.
middle classes,
Upper middle
yeah,
class, their English
they're
is
like
good,
they
right?
speak like scholars,
Exactly.
yeah. But this is comes back to governance, doesn't it? I mean, I learned the other day that salaried people pay tax here at source. So the tax is taken from their wages by their employer before they receive
Exactly.
their
From the
salary. So,
source.
so every civil servant in this country, every salaried person pays tax. What happens to the revenue, man? Because I can't see that it's being spent on education. I can't see that the people who have a decent education here are generally privately educated, right? The parents pay for their education. So what's the government providing for people? What happens to the
And
tax?
still the tax to GDP ratio is 9%. All the salaried person are giving the tax to the
Yeah,
government, and in return they are what they are getting. Yeah,
nothing.
nothing. Yeah,
So
yeah.
what happens is you're a salaried person, you're low middle class, right? You pay tax, and in return for the tax, you don't get free education, you don't get healthcare, you don't get any welfare. Forget that. Yeah, you don't get any social housing. So what happens to the tax? Yeah. So let's follow this to its logical conclusion. Yeah, you're a working person, you pay tax, and what does the government do with the tax? Well, a significant proportion goes to the military, right? So the army get it. I don't know what the percentage is. I think it's more than 40%, right, of the tax take, if I'm not mistaken.
Even more than that.
Apologies if I got that wrong,
More than
right?
that, right?
So the wealthy, the oligarchs, don't pay much tax here
Yeah.
because they have their structures in place, and they're non-resident and they're living in Dubai, and they're living here, they're living there, so they don't pay any tax. So a working person pays tax. The tax goes to a military establishment which is there to protect the ultra wealthy. I mean, it's just a marvelous system if you're rich, you know what I mean? Because you don't pay anything, but you get everything back in return. So,
One more thing here in Pakistan, that there are very few direct taxes, right? The whole taxation system is so much regressive. There
yeah, it
are
is. Yeah.
indirect
Sales
taxes, right?
taxes, yeah, which affect
Yeah,
poor people more, don't they?
exactly,
Because, when you
exactly.
buy things, if you're earning a low salary, it's a higher proportion of your income than if you're earning a huge salary. So, yeah, the taxation system is unfair. I was looking into this the other day because I was thinking about my retirement. I realized that it's up to 40%, Yeah, so that's quite a high tax burden. And you wonder
On a
what
salaried
yeah,
person,
on a
right?
salaried person,
Again,
yeah. You wonder what happens to it, or a pensioner.
there are slabs, right?
Yeah, there are
But if
slabs,
you
but
are
if you're a pensioner with a pension from overseas, and you retire to Pakistan, and you're receiving your pension here as a resident, you'll pay tax on that. 40% is a huge amount of money to pay, yeah, because obviously because it's a foreign pension, it's likely to be on the higher tax
yeah,
band,
yeah,
yeah. So
definitely.
it's a huge price to pay to live here, really, and get nothing in return. Because when you pay 40% in the UK, for example, where I was born,
Yeah, you are getting
yeah,
so many
you get
benefits.
welfare, you get healthcare, you get all kinds of these things which the tax burden pays for, but it doesn't seem to be the case here.
Okay, let's come to the international scenario, right? In you have you followed the American
I did,
elections?
yes.
So are you what your what you,
Well, well, I mean, I'm tempted to say I was disappointed, but if it's possible to dislike both sides, I dislike both sides, right?
Democrats and Republicans
Yeah.
both?
I think they both are the same thing, basically. They're both neoliberal. They are both batting for campaign contributions. So the more campaign contributions you give, the more say you have in governance, and it's corrupt. It's a corrupt system, basically. It's a system of lobbying and dollars, US dollars buying influence. So I dislike both of them.
But in America, Zahid, there is a democracy, right?
It's a democracy, but I think it's a perverse democracy. It's a democracy where I think the wealthy have more rights than clearly. I mean, I think wealth buys you more power in America. I think the system there is really is perverted, and I think it's going to be. I think they have serious problems with their democracy. You can see this from the outcome of this election. Yeah, the guy, he's a convicted felon, right? Um, he's been convicted of rape as well in a civil court. Um, he's a fraudster. He's a liar. I mean, everything really. I mean, he's just an extremely dislikable or dishonest. He's not a very nice person. Yet people voted for him. Not only did he win the electoral college, he actually won the popular vote as well, which is remarkable. So, what does that say about the Democrats? What does that say about Kamala Harris and Joe Biden when this man, with all these failings as a human being, right, gets more votes than them?
So
to me,
what was the reason?
the reason is because, I mean, it goes back to, I've been looking at data recently. I've been looking at data about wealth inequality in the West, in Western Europe and in America. And I mean, I have to confess, I've not seen the American data, but I understand it's very similar to the European data. But if you look at the European data, 1945 to 1980 is like this. Bottom 90%, top 10%. So between 1945 and 1980, the bottom 90% are getting more and more wealth, yeah? And you get to this point in 1980, and then it goes like this, yeah? So from 1980 to 2024, it's like this. The top 10% getting more and more wealth,
just
yeah?
getting down.
Yeah,
down,
it's basically more and more wealth to the top 10%, yeah? And they don't want to share it. And I think something has to give, because there is inequality. There's severe wealth inequality in the West now. And people are angry. They're angry because, you know, they pay tax and they don't see necessarily getting the kind of dividend that they should be getting back in return for it now. And they're being squeezed from all sides, and the wealthy don't want to pay tax. And I think that this anger manifested itself in people voting for someone who pretended to have solutions. Because the thing about populists is that they make everything sound so easy. Yeah, I want to do this. I want to stop the borders. I'm going to have tariffs and import tariffs on China. All these kind of solutions seem like good solutions if you're desperate and if you're angry. You know, it seems like at least it's an idea. The Democrats had no ideas. Yeah, their idea is more of the same. You know, let's make things easier for big business. Let's make things easier for Elon Musk.
So what's the difference in between Republican?
There is none. There is no difference. The only difference is the Democrats are slightly more palatable because at least they don't say nasty things about foreigners and about people of color and about Muslims and about trans. At least they are on cultural issues. At least they're more tolerant. Yeah. Whereas on cultural issues, the Republicans aren't. They believe in. That they're pro-life, you know, for example, you know, that they believe in deporting people who don't have the correct papers and having bans on Muslims and building walls for Mexicans. So they're more tolerable from a social perspective. Mm-hmm. But in terms of economics, they're exactly the same. None of them have got any solution.
And Zahid, you just mentioned that before 1980 or till 1980, it was going like this, right?
Yeah.
From budget,
the distribution,
the distribution is coming for the poor people, for the low income people. So why is it so? Don't you think that this you have to give credit to Bolshevik, right?
Yeah, well, I'm not necessarily to Bolsheviks, but yeah, to the threat of communism. You know,
the threat of communism.
There were two world wars. You know, and after the Second World War, I think the proletariat was really angry because, you know, they had suffered again.
Proletariat in West, right?
In West, yeah. So I'm talking about Western Europe, and I'm talking about America. Well, America not so much. America was wealthy.
Western
America
Europe,
was doing very well. Let's focus on Western Europe, right? So, you know, Germany, Britain, France, Italy, they were devastated, by the Second World War. Even the smaller nations, Netherlands and Belgium, they were totally devastated by it. So you had all these soldiers coming back with nothing, basically. Coming back to nothing, you know, economy is devastated. And, you know, there was a real threat of left movements seizing power.
All over the world.
Yeah, all over the world. Yeah. And I don't mean social democratic movements. I mean, obviously, left movements did get power after the Second World War. I'm talking about, you know, communist movements, the far left. And I think the Americans were genuinely frightened that there will be, you know, communist administrations all over Western Europe. And that's why they come up with the Marshall Plan. And so you had the Americans coming up with a campaign of rebuilding Europe, you know, by making these loans. Did you know that Britain only paid off the loan in the last sort of 10 years? So there was that. And there was also the elections were remarkable. That happened in 1945. I mean, in the UK, for example, Churchill was Conservative on the right, and then you had Attlee for Labour on the left, and Labour won by the biggest majority ever. Slide. You know, there was a landslide, and because people wanted change, and they got change. And so you had a combination of American dollars coming in to create infrastructure, and then you had, you know, progressive governments which were giving healthcare, social housing, welfare, education, you know, all of these things which we take for granted now. And so I think it was a fear of communism that meant that, you know, the redistribution happened. But by 1980, the bourgeois were fed up with this. Yeah, the oligarchs were fed up with this. They were like, this is going on too long now. We can't have this anymore. And then there was a reversal, and then the neo-Keynesian economics, which dominated, after the prescription for the Marshall Plan was written by John Maynard Keynes. Yeah, the progressive governments of Western Europe followed the same policy of tax and spend. Tax people, spend money on
But
welfare
here
and
one more question, right? Why
services. Yeah,
it's all happening, right? And we have seen that in UK there was a Jeremy Corbyn,
yeah.
and in America there was a
Bernie
Bernie
Sanders.
Sanders,
Yeah.
right? Why they fail to do
I think
something
they
or
failed for
to,
different reasons. I think they failed. I think Bernie Sanders is really popular.
yeah.
I think Bernie Sanders failed because the Democratic Party, I think, they're too influenced by big business and global capital, and maybe they were afraid of having him, and they preferred safe options like Hillary Clinton, which weren't safe options because they lost. But I think in Corbyn in England, I don't think Corbyn's that popular. I think there's a myth amongst people of the left that Corbyn's really, really popular. He's really popular amongst the left, but to win an election, you need global appeal. And the problem with Corbyn is that he's always been associated with things which are anti-British. He's always been on the side of someone else, yeah, in every argument. And people remember that. And I think the media were able to use that to make him sound like he was treasonous or he was, a foreign agent or something, yeah. So mud sticks. If you throw enough of it, it sticks over time. He's a decent guy, Corbyn, but I think he's a bit naive at times, But I think left movements in the West now need to move away from being preachy and being pompous and self-righteous, and they need to get more populist. They need to take some lessons from the right. You can have left politics, you can also have populist left politics. Yeah, they need to think about
Populist,
populist, yeah,
left politics.
yeah, populist left politics. Understand that basically.
Can you give any examples?
Yeah, I can give examples. I mean, look, at the moment, the left movements in Europe, right? They are a little bit arrogant. They think they know more than ordinary people do. Yeah, they think they have the answers. Yeah, they think they know better. They know what's better for a working person. The working person does himself. Now, to some degree, that may be true. But if you keep doing that, the thing is, ordinary people in the UK, for example, where I come from, right? Even if they are progressively minded, even if they're inclined to vote Labour, there are certain issues which they're uncomfortable with. And you have to accept that. This whole trans thing, maybe there's a feeling, I don't agree with it, but there's a feeling that's gone too far, and there's a feeling that cultural issues now to the left are more important than economic issues, which is not good, because fundamentally the left should be about redistribution. It should be about making social justice and making people's lives better. Now, obviously, people's lives can be improved, with cultural reasons as well, not just social reasons, not just with economic policy, but fundamentally it has to be about economic policy. And I think maybe the West, the left movements in the West, have lost sight of that. I think they need to go back to roots, yeah, and understand what concerns working people, and then have solutions for those problems, yeah, even if they're uncomfortable at times. For example, working people in the West are uncomfortable about immigration. You have to accept that, yeah? And then you have to have immigration laws which reflect that. And in the UK, for example, we've been far too lenient with immigration because big business wants immigration, right? Big business wants people to come in and have labour and have cheap labour. And they've allowed, especially Tony Blair, under him, there was huge waves of migration which came to the country, which have caused social problems, and I think we need to accept that. To me, I don't believe in immigration controls, yeah, but that's me, that's not going to be a popular policy with the electorate at large. Right? Yeah, you have to reflect what the electorate wants as well from time to time, even if it's uncomfortable.
But don't you think it's so much opportunist approach to give the slogans which are populist, right?
No, I'm not suggesting that you give slogans. I'm not saying you say things which are nasty or divisive, right? But have solutions for problems. Yeah, I'm not advocating that you take the leaf out of the right wing and you start demonizing minorities or no, not that at all. But at least have a policy for things which concern people. If working people are concerned about immigration, have a policy for immigration. Don't pretend it doesn't exist or tell them they don't know what they're talking about and that you know better than them, because maybe you don't. So I'm not advocating that you do the divisive stuff that the Front National do in France or the movements do in Germany or Austria. No, not at all.
Okay, Zahid, one more thing, right? Nowadays there is a debate on one thing. I want to know about your take on it. multipolar and unipolar.
What does that mean?
This world is unipolar, right?
Right.
Controlled by America, one power, right?
Yeah.
And some people do say that, for example, China, Russia, right? BRICS, they are making BRICS and
Yeah.
developments, right? They always say that unipolar, multipolar world is good,
Yeah.
and China is not the socialist, not a capitalist, not an imperialist,
Right.
right? China, they portray China that it's what you say, it's coming in front of America, right? And to making the whole world
Yeah.
multipolar, right? And multipolar world is good for the people, for the workers, for everyone. Even some people do still do claim, right? There are tendencies in left also that they do claim that China is still a socialist country.
That's a
Yeah,
joke.
I'm not
Yeah.
joking. I'm
Okay.
telling you, right? And they also says that China is doing something, right? And you will see the results, right?
Yeah, we've seen the results
So,
already. Okay, well, that's a double-faceted question. Firstly, I think it's good to have balance of power in the global world order, right? You don't want one power which is all dominant and all bullying and all controlling, yeah? So it's good to have balance of power. I do agree with that. Um, but, how does that balance of power manifest itself is the important thing, yeah? And, this thing about demonizing the Americans, yeah, I don't think it's helpful. Yeah, now American foreign policy has been toxic, yeah, since the 1950s. If you look at the coup in Iran, which they instigated, which is, you had 70 years of problems in Iran because of that, yeah, because of that one action when they helped a coup to unseat a democratically elected leader and then replaced him with the Shah.
sure.
Yeah, so you've had all the problems in Iran now can be traced back to that act by Eisenhower and the West. So yeah, the Americans have done lots of things which are rotten. Yeah, whether it's getting involved in Vietnam, but
Afghanistan, and the list is,
yeah,
yeah.
this is endless, right? But then you could look at other powers as well and say that they've also done things which were questionable. I mean, you won't agree with this, but the sort of after the Second World War, the Soviet Union rolling into Eastern Europe here and taking over those countries, without elected mandates. I mean, to me, that was that was a crime. As I said, you probably don't agree with that, but
I don't agree with you.
we beg to differ on
Anyway,
that. Yeah,
because it's a different
yeah,
topic, right?
it's a
I
different.
don't want to touch
No,
that.
no, that's fine. And the Central Asia, the Stans, which were Russified by the Soviets. The culture and the language was suppressed. So these things happen. Other countries do these things as well. Yeah. Now,
But there are so much literature is there of Lenin on the national question, right? And he gives so much liberty in deciding the fate of the nations, right? Again, it's a
yeah,
different
look, I
topic.
mean,
I don't want to discuss
we don't
this
know what Lenin
right
would have
now.
done
Yeah,
if he'd
yeah,
lived here. Lenin died very quickly after the revolution, right?
yeah.
So he was dead within 4 or 5 years. I mean, so we don't know what he would have done. Yeah, so he didn't drive the Soviet Union forward. That's another debate for another time. But going back to your original question, to me, there are no good guys in the world order, right? All these people are nasty. Is Putin really any better than Joe Biden? I don't think so. To me, they're all the same. China's socialist. Let's just take a look at this. Yeah, let's consider this now, right? China, for the last 40 years, has been a sweatshop, right, for Western corporations, Nike, Microsoft, Apple, whoever. Yeah,
Every corporation
every
is
corporation
there,
has been
right?
there, right? So they've not been paying. I mean, let's rewind slightly, right? So let's look at General Motors. Yeah, General Motors is making cars in Michigan,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden they close the operation down and
And
they take the operation to Korea or China or whatever, right? And they start making the same car there for a lower rate and then importing it into America and selling it for the same
same
price.
price.
Same price, yeah.
Yeah.
Exploitation, double exploitation, right? Exploitation, first of all, betrayal of the American worker, one, yeah. Number two, betrayal of exploitation of the Chinese worker or the Korean worker who's being paid a far lower wage, yeah, to do the same work. And then exploitation of the American consumer. So on so many levels, that's just completely wrong, right? And China has facilitated this. China has been renting out its population, as slave labor to American corporations, right, to enable them to get goods made cheaper, and so they can sell them to the American market. How is that socialist? What part of that is socialism? I mean, that's just, that's the most obscene, immoral act, for a party, the communist.
But Zaid, what China has done for their population, do they have any other option other than this? How to feed 1.5 billion? If they would not inviting the foreign corporation, I am not with the China, right?
Yeah.
I'm just putting one question in front of you, one situation in front of you.
Listen, if that's what they want to do, right, and if that's their way out of a problem of feeding 1.5 billion Chinese, then fine, I'm not judging them for that, right? But don't tell me it's socialist. Don't tell me that's how socialist. It's not socialism. It's exploitation, right? It's worse than exploitation. But you're letting other people exploit your workers. Forget exploiting them yourself, You're letting other people come in and exploit them, on your own backyard, and they're paying a price for that now. And all right, they got economic growth on the back of it, and they managed to do things. But Chinese workers still work longest hours, amongst the longest hours in the world. They work 6 days,
even lowest wage, right?
Yeah, a very low wage. They don't get great wages. Most of those people live in terrible conditions. And okay, maybe their condition is better than it was in 1948.
And inequality is also...
It's huge inequality. I live in the West, I mean, I see the Chinese that come over there. They're not communists. I mean, these guys are multi-millionaire. China has trillionaires, for goodness sake. I mean, how is that consistent with socialism? China is not a socialist country. China is a classic state capitalist country, where the bureaucracy controls everything and the bureaucracy benefits from exploitation of its people, So say many things about China, good or bad, right? But don't tell me that it's a socialist country, because it singularly is not a socialist country. And the idea that, China behaves differently or more ethically, it does exactly the same thing that the Americans have been doing, It gives loans to third world countries. When they can't pay the loans, it takes over their assets, Fine. That's what countries do. That's modern imperialism, right? The Americans have done it for years. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. So China does the same thing as well. But don't tell me they've got more ethics
and
than...
those who argue for the China, they give one argument that China never invaded any country like America, right?
Tibet, parts of Mongolia, parts of India. They occupy parts of Pakistani Kashmir, right? All right, Pakistan gave it to them, right? But they still occupy it. I mean, they were in North Korea, I mean, I'm sorry, but the evidence doesn't back that up,
And secondly, there is economic invasion also, everywhere.
Everywhere. I mean, I've spent time in Africa. You have as well, We go to Tanzania, you go to Uganda, you go to Congo. You see Chinese people there, right? Sri Lanka. They've taken over the assets in Sri Lanka. I mean, look, I'm not judging that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But the idea that they're somehow different. The difference between the Chinese and the Americans, right? I'll tell you the fundamental difference is that the Chinese don't sell their culture, right? They're interested in making money. They're interested in economic exploitation. The Americans are interested in the same thing, but the Americans also want to export their culture over the world. They want everyone to be an American. The Chinese don't care, basically, right? That's the difference between the two, right? But apart from that, imperial powers, whether they're Chinese, Americans or Russians, are exactly the same. Russia has been an imperial power for 1,000 years, These... all these Central Asian republics, and even what's the name of that region, Dagestan, and I mean, Dagestan is not Russian, is it? I mean, how does that sound Russian to you? But it's part of Russia now. Siberia wasn't part of Russia originally. Muscovy was a small state, And now, when you see the Russians in Africa, right? They call themselves Wagner. And why is Wagner there for? Wagner's there to take the assets, to take the gold and the minerals. That's what they're there for. It's basically imperialism by proxy. Wagner's not an independent body. It's an agency of the Russian government. What do they call it? It's to deny credible denial. Or I don't know what the expression is, right? But they're able to deny that it's them, but it's them. So all these powers behave exactly the same way. They're no different. There's no good guys. There's no bad guys, right? There's degrees of badness, basically. None of them are good. So and BRICS. Okay, you got India in there, I mean, Indian administration. Would you trust them with anything? With this Modi and this Hindu fascism that's going on over there at the moment? Are they people that are going to give you a leadership in the world order? Come on. No. Say what you want about the Americans. You'd rather live in America as a Muslim than you would live in India at the moment.
You cannot.
Yeah.
So, anything else you want to comment
I don't know.
in a
We've
current
covered a
current
lot of
situation?
we've
Yeah.
covered a lot of subjects. Yeah, I think. No, I mean, thank you for having me on there, and I'm hope people can understand what I'm saying. I hope I don't speak too
No, no,
fast.
definitely.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we always on a YouTube there is an option for the translate, right?
Okay.
So those who want to read or to hear you, they can just put one button and they will get the
Yeah. The only thing I was
translation.
saying in passing is that I would like Pakistan to have a progressive movement. I would like people in Pakistan to be aware of progressive politics. I don't think they are. I don't think there's an understanding of what it means to be of the left. I think that it's something which is not really, culturally. I think it's underground. It's not really
No, no.
encouraged to.
Nowadays there's nothing underground, right? Everything is on the ground.
Is it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Fair
you
enough. Well,
don't need to
well,
hide
well,
anything.
let's hope there's a progressive movement which evolves in Pakistan, and whether it's a communist or whether it's a libertarian socialist, people of the left, that they need to stick together to drive change, and then once that change come, then they can argue amongst themselves about who wins the election and who loses the election. Yeah. But up until that point, I think it's very important that people on the left stay
And
together.
are you optimistic for such change in Pakistan?
I'm always optimistic. I think you have to be optimistic because the people can change anything they want. Yeah, I mean, you've seen the Berlin Wall come down. You've seen remarkable things happen over the last 50, 60 years, and that we thought were unimaginable. And there's no reason why change can't come to Pakistan. But I think it needs good leadership, and it needs leaders who genuinely care about the country, and and who want the people to be emancipated.
And can you give the definition of the good leadership? Because followers of Nawaz Sharif are still in a belief that he is a good leader. Imran followers of Imran Khan
Yeah.
thinks that Imran is the best leader or the world leader. So what's the definition of good leader to you?
Well, definition of a good leader. Well, I think first of all integrity. I think to me a good leader, maybe a good leader is the wrong word, but I think someone who respects the diversity of the country, right? All the different groups of the country. I think that's missing from the leadership you have at the moment. Imran Khan is a populist. He tries to appeal to he tries to be everything to everyone. When he's talking to me, he'll be a socialist. When he's talking to you, he'll be a quasi-communist. When he's talking to someone else, he'll be a Islamic radical. I'm not sure what he stands for really, apart from getting elected. I think with these guys, I think there's no vision. I don't really see a vision. So a good leadership is having a vision for the country. Yeah, having a vision that makes the country better. And I think religious conservatism and getting away from secular values, getting away from critical thinking. I see no one really that wants to encourage that kind of thing. And that to me is good leadership, basically. Investing in your people, making sure they're educated, making sure they're able to think for themselves and make decisions by themselves without being, fed propaganda from one side or another. That a vision for the country, basically. And a vision for the country means unwinding the damage that Zia did. That's what I mean, but actually, that's my definition of good leadership. So until someone is prepared to challenge that and address that, you're going to have the same old.
And
same old.
You are optimistic, right?
Yeah, I'm always optimistic. Yeah, I think there.
Okay,
there's
Zahid,
always
thank
hope.
you very much. Right, next time when you will come again and we will have podcast again with you.
Thank you
right?
very much.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
thank
Thank you.
you.
Take care.
मेहनत कशी इस दुनिया से जब अपना हिस्सा मांगेंगे एक बाग नहीं एक खेत नहीं हम सारी दुनिया मांगेंगे एक बाग नहीं एक खेत नहीं हम सारी दुनिया मांगेंगे